And it's true. Kylo Ren / Ben Solo did ultimately finish what his grandfather started. I am your host, Jon Justice. This is Positively Star Wars, and I'm so glad you're with the show again this week as we head into a brand new year, 2020, and we look forward by looking back a couple of weeks at the Rise of Skywalker and our continued discussion about this film, which will be the focal point of the show, at least for the next several weeks as we head into the new year, because there's a lot of different angles to cover about this particular movie. A lot of listener feedback this week. We will get into that. That's going to be the bulk of the show. As I mentioned last week, I'm changing the name of the show. It is still My Nerd World, but it is going to be Positively Star Wars. And I just felt like there needed to be a bit of rebranding on the show to reflect what I want this show to be. In terms of content, it really isn't going to change. But I want you to know, and the people who check out the show for the first time to know, that this is going to be a show focusing on Star Wars and celebrating it every week in a positive light. That's not to say that I won't be reading critical emails. That's not to say that I won't be criticizing Star Wars in the future, but it is to say that I'm not the type of person, it's just not who I am, and the type of show I want to do, that wants to grab onto a bunch of negativity. And I just don't have a lot of negativity surrounding Star Wars. I love all of Star Wars, some more than others for various reasons. I love The Rise of Skywalker. I really do adore this movie. As I mentioned in the open, I'm going to be seeing it again today for the 7th time, and there is no part of this movie that I don't find highly entertaining. And I can't really say that about every single Star Wars film. I mean, for a lot of the other films I can, but there is something very unique, just like there is about The Last Jedi. There's something very unique and special, in my opinion, about The Rise of Skywalker and the decisions that were made in the movie. There's been a couple of different articles that have come out over the course of the past few days from editors on the film and producers on the film talking about the extensive editing process that The Rise of Skywalker went through and the reason why certain things in the movie weren't covered more in depth. Particularly, I guess, there was some further details as to why Palpatine was able to survive from Return of the Jedi. That was explored a little bit more. There was also some talk that there was a little bit more depth to, not the ending in particular, but just a little bit more fleshing out of some of the elements of the film. And I'm reading the article, and I don't really care. It doesn't really bother me that those things weren't included. A lot of times, and that's especially true, in my opinion, with what we're dealing with right now within the fandom, a lot of times, people, I think, forget that these films, and I even push back on this quite a bit, but people forget these films weren't made for necessarily for me. And they weren't necessarily made for you. They were made for a much broader audience. The biggest audience, the majority of the fans that do not include you and they do not include me. I got into a Twitter exchange with somebody this week who was pushing back on my commenting that the negativity, just like with The Last Jedi, that's now been placed on The Rise of Skywalker is coming from a minority part of the fandom. And this person on Twitter pushed back on me and says, I don't think that's the case. And I laid out my argument as to why I believe that is the case, because we're talking about what's being discussed within social media. And being a full-time radio talk show host, this applies in politics, this applies in sports, and this applies in pop culture. We tend to get very narrowly focused on what we're seeing and thinking that that's the majority of how people feel, when it's not the reality. The United States uses Twitter the most, but even then, in the U.S., only 22% of the population is on Twitter, has a Twitter account. Only 10% of those individuals are actually tweeting, and then you get down even further, you see where I'm going here. The demographics don't bear out, right? It certainly is true with politics. The majority of the content on Twitter is not about politics, but depending on who you follow in your feed, like me, I've got a couple of different Twitter accounts. I have Jon Justice and I have my Nerd World, and on my Jon Justice account, you would see a very specific sort of politically minded feed and a lot of individuals that agree. And you would think, well, that represents the majority of people because look at my timeline on Twitter. That's not true. It represents the individuals that I follow on Twitter that I choose to see. The same thing rings true for the My Nerd World Twitter account, which is more about my book writing, EMBARK, available on Amazon, and about Star Wars. But even then, that's not representative of a majority of fans because not a majority of fans are on Twitter. And then you begin to whittle that down to your individual feeds and you see that the numbers just don't bear out to it being majority. That was the case when it came to the negativity towards The Last Jedi, and that's the case when it comes to the negativity towards the Rise of Skywalker. And that really means nothing because it really comes down to how you feel about the film and how I feel about the film, right? But when people are trying to craft arguments and pushing forward particular narratives, that relevant information of the number of individuals that are actually a part of whatever narrative or movement is being pushed forward comes into play because you think it's the majority of people, but it's not. I'm dancing around the issue. What I'm talking about is there's a trend right now of release the JJ cut. This is largely stemming from something similar that happened with Justice League. That went through a difficult production process. Zack Snyder pitched off of the movie of filming Justice League. His daughter tragically committed suicide, so he left to go deal with that. Joss Whedon came in, ended up shooting a bunch more footage, ended up crafting the film that we saw in theaters, which I enjoyed. I own the Blu-ray. I like watching it. It's got a ton of flaws, but I enjoy watching it. It's fun. It's superheroes for crying out loud. But there's a group of individuals online who believe that there is this Snyder cut, and even Zack Snyder has commented that there is a version, but it wasn't completed, that's out there that they want to see because they believe it's better than what they got. So now we have this release the JJ cut. Based off of some individuals on Reddit who claim to have information about the production and that there was stuff that was cut out that needs to be included. This, of course, has also been somewhat reinforced by actual people who worked on the film who said that they did have to cut a lot out of the movie. And even Chris Terrio said that he almost wishes that the film were two movies. The writer of the Rise of Skywalker novel said that if you included everything in the novel, the movie would be 3 hours long. Okay, well, that's only about 35 minutes longer than what it is right now, and I can pretty much guarantee that you can say that with every single one of the modern-day Star Wars films. You can't necessarily say that when it comes to the original trilogy. If you've seen any of those original trilogy books, they're very short. They stick mostly to what's in the film. They don't add a lot. But if you look at The Force Awakens, and certainly the individuals that read The Last Jedi, and with what's coming with The Rise of Skywalker, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that the books are going to have a lot more information. That's what the books are there for. It doesn't mean that we could have gotten a different film. Maybe we could have. Maybe it would have been better. Maybe it wouldn't have. I know for me, I don't care. I love director's cuts, and if they want to release a director's cut, if there is indeed one of The Rise of Skywalker when the Blu-ray comes out or when it lands on Disney Plus, hey man, I'm all for it. Give me more footage. I don't need it though. And I'm certainly not going to demand it. And that's what I'm kind of referring to, is that there's a chorus of fans that are out there right now demanding the JJ cut. And I had somebody that actually talked to me again on Twitter and said that that's the cut that we deserve, we need to see. And I go, well, that really, again, comes down to you, the individual. You want a movie that you believe you're going to agree with more, and you think that's going to be provided in an alternate cut of the film. And again, if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. I'm not going to take that away from you. But I'm here to tell you, going back to the reason why I started this opening rant, which I don't want to have go too long because I have a lot of listener feedback that I want to get to. But that kind of goes back to my opening rant in that with this show, I'm not going to go down those roads. We got an amazing film. I love this movie. I'm probably going to end up seeing it more times in theaters than I did The Force Awakens, which I saw 12 times in theaters. I enjoy every single viewing of this movie, and I love it more and more every time I see it. I've seen it to the point where I almost may like it more than The Last Jedi. I'm not sure yet. They're two very different films. But I can tell you that as of right now, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker are my two favorite Star Wars films. And I love so much of the decisions that were made, and even the complaints, and I mentioned this last week, and some of you brought this up in the listener feedback, which we'll get to. Even when it comes to the pacing issue, I have no problems with it anymore. And I wonder, too, of the individuals who have a problem with the pacing, because I kind of did the first time I saw it. The first time I saw the movie, I thought that the beginning was paced a little bit too fast. But on seeing it with multiple viewings, I came to realize that the only reason why I felt that way is because how I watch Star Wars movies, especially the very first time. Because I am so into this universe and I'm so into this world that's been created, and I'm so excited to watch it that I want to take everything in. And my brain is working so fast watching the movie the first time that if it's cut in a certain way, it's going to seem like it's going really fast because I want to hang on certain things longer. But on my subsequent viewings now, there is no issues with the pacing for me personally whatsoever. And I'm completely satisfied with the way that they handled the storytelling, even some of the ambiguity that they left in the film, because all Star Wars movies have some level of ambiguity to it. I was listening to another podcast, and somebody was bringing up, I think it was Around the Galaxy, was what I was listening to. Somebody was bringing up the complaints about Rose not being in the movie. And they made the comment that they felt like Rose got Boba Fetted, or she got the Boba Fett treatment, meaning that he was, added into A New Hope, but that's besides the point. We really got our first introduction to Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back, but didn't really get a lot from the character, even though he was really compelling to look at. And then when you get into Return of the Jedi, he gets offed really quick at the beginning during the scenes on Tatooine and Jabba's palace. But you can say that about so many different characters in Star Wars. Darth Maul went out in the first movie. He was brought back, obviously, in the ancillary material, but he was killed off in the Phantom Menace. Snap Wexley didn't make it into The Last Jedi, even though it was explained in other ancillary material where he ended up going. Zam Wesell, who was a kick-butt character in Attack of the Clones and looked amazing, as my buddy Zach over on Knights of Vader always says, that it was Daft Punk Zam Wesell is what Zori Bliss looked like, who I think is awesome too and a really good example. I'd love to see more from her, but I'm completely satisfied with what we got in the movie. But Zam Wesell is killed off early on. I mean, look, Star Wars has a history of bringing up really cool characters and getting rid of them, just like Captain Phasma. So, and again, I'm getting off topic here, and I want to make sure I remain focused and get to the listener feedback. But again, my point is that the films are what you make them, and I am not personally going to go down that road and nitpick and tear them all apart or jump onto some larger narrative, because I love Star Wars too much to do that, and I want this show to be the show that I have not found otherwise. And it was part of the reason why I started the show, is that I wanted a place where I could talk about Star Wars and just prayed that people came along for the ride and enjoyed what I had to say. But I also wanted to create something that I'm not getting anywhere else. And I had to unsubscribe to about 5 different podcasts over the course of the past few days. I was getting caught up, finally going back to work and driving back and forth from work. I was finally getting caught up on some other podcasts and couldn't believe the amount of just negativity and hot takes that I just did not agree with. And everybody's entitled to their opinion. I like to hear discussion, but I reach a point where I go, this isn't fun. Star Wars is fun. I want to have fun. I want to have a good time, and I want to talk about it in a fun way and appreciate it and enjoy it. And unfortunately, social networking has taken a lot of that fun and joy out of Star Wars right now, and it sucks. And I really do honestly feel bad for the individuals who were wanting something else from the Rise of Skywalker that they didn't get. That's a bummer, and I'm it's a bummer for you that experience was ruined for you and the film was ruined for you. All I can say is that for me it wasn't, and for as much as I love Star Wars, I also accept the decision of the content creators. And at the end of the day, for as big as a Star Wars fan I am, and I think my credibility is sound with that, I also know these are all still just movies. And I tend to rationalize almost on a positive level. So I appreciate a lot of what you guys have had to say, and I'm going to get into a lot of that coming up as I lose my place for all my emails here. I'm going to get into a lot of that with your listener feedback this week because a lot of you guys have been commenting on this very thing. But this is Positively Star Wars. I'm going to keep it as being as positive as possible. And the bulk of the commentary, if not all the commentary you're going to hear from me every single week on this show is going to be a celebration of Star Wars and all the ways that I love Star Wars. And if there are things about Star Wars that I don't like, I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just not going to get into it because that's not what I want this show to be about. I want this show to be about a place where every time you go to download, listen, or watch Positively Star Wars from my nerd world that you're going to hear commentary that hopefully will be positive, uplifting, and a celebration of this amazing world that's been created for us. All right, so that's it for the opening commentary. I'll save further comments about the Rise of Skywalker for listener feedback and other shows. But like I said, you guys have been writing in because I've asked you to, and I really do appreciate it. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com and also on YouTube. So let's not waste any more time and get into your listener feedback for this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, first comment comes from Zach in Black 182. Dear John, longtime listener, first-time commenter. Just wanted to say how much I appreciate your podcast. Even though I don't agree with everything you say, I still love your passion. And thank you for that. And listen, everybody, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree, write in. Okay, please do. Just because it's titled Positively Star Wars doesn't mean that you can't be critical or present your own criticism. That's totally fine, right? I'm totally cool with that, and I encourage that. All right. And again, agreeing with me on everything would actually be kind of boring. So, again, feel free. Share your comments, whatever they are. I consider myself a diehard Star Wars fan since I was 3 years old. I don't care for the prequels that much, but they have some wonderful things in them. I think all Star Wars movies have great qualities to them. I used to be upset and salty about The Last Jedi. I loved it after seeing it in the movie theater, but the more I thought about it, I was extremely upset about Rian Johnson killing Luke. I've been attached to that character since I can remember. So I hated that movie because they killed him off and I was in denial. However, after seeing The Rise of Skywalker and rewatching The Last Jedi, I think all the movies flow rather nicely. And The Rise of Skywalker has given me closure to Luke's arc, and I've finally come around to loving the sequel trilogy. I don't know if you're going to read this, but thanks for the wonderful show and all the positivity. I did read it there, Zach, and I very much appreciate your comments. And that's kind of where I fall as well. I never had a problem with Luke's death in The Last Jedi. There were some things when I watched it the first time that I was kind of like, the space cow milking scene, right? I love that now. I've mentioned many times that from the start, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Canto Bight sequence. Now I really enjoy it. But therein also lies the contrast to The Rise of Skywalker because J.J. Abrams continues to make, and I will continue to say this, infinitely rewatchable movies. And The Rise of Skywalker is just that. That movie moves at such a brisk pace, and I am so keyed into JJ's style. As, again, I've also mentioned before, there's something about J.J. Abrams and I that we have a lot in common in terms of aesthetic that I really enjoy, and he just happens to grab onto that. So, in terms of depth, I think I still like The Last Jedi more as a cohesive full film, but in terms of entertainment value, I think I'm more overall entertained by The Rise of Skywalker. All right, Autobahn Kenobi says this. If I could have a reasonable explanation for the Force Cave scene making any sense, now, in light of what we learned about Rey in The Rise of Skywalker, I might like this movie more. No doubt it's slick and entertaining, but I have some big problems with the lineage retcon. A lot of The Last Jedi seems ruined now. I can't get past that mentally to enjoy the trilogy. I'm not 100% sure if you're talking about, and feel free to respond and I can address it again on next week's show. I'm not 100% sure whether or not you're talking about the Force Cave scene from The Empire Strikes Back or the scene inside of the Death Star 2 wreckage from The Rise of Skywalker. Let me zero in on that particular scene because I think that might be what you're referring to. And then I'll address the Last Jedi and the lineage aspect of it. Unless you're talking about, maybe you're talking about the dark side cave from The Last Jedi, right? Which could certainly also be the case. So I'll address both of those. I've watched The Last Jedi since watching the Rise of Skywalker, and I was very curious how I was going to perceive the dark side cave from The Last Jedi in light of what we learned from the Rise of Skywalker. My takeaway on that and how I decipher that is that this is what the dark side cave wanted to show Rey at that moment in time. Whatever the Force, the dark side Force, wanted to show Rey in that moment in The Last Jedi, it wasn't what her true lineage was. It was, who are my parents? It wasn't, the dark side cave was not going to show her at that point in time. Instead, it was going to show her what was going to scare her the most. Okay. Now, I am completely rationalizing. I'm injecting that as my headcanon at the moment in the absence of having an official answer as to why the dark side cave in The Last Jedi showed Rey instead of her parents. However, remember that when you first see that happening, you do see two bodies in the background coming together before it shows Rey. So again, my interpretation was the dark side Force cave wanted to put Rey in a tough spot. Showing her to individuals, being her parents, wouldn't do that because they are individuals that she had forgotten about or wouldn't necessarily recognize right up front in that moment in time. It took being prodded by Kylo Ren in The Rise of Skywalker for her to eventually go and remember who her parents were at that young age. So again, I interpret it as the dark side cave was showing her at the moment something that was going to be the most difficult thing for her to deal with, and that was not showing her her parents, showing a reflection of her. Getting to, briefly, the moment in The Rise of Skywalker on the Death Star and the dark side cave, I took that more as just an extension of Rey going through her further Force training and the Force getting involved in that, and again, showing her what she could end up becoming if she goes down this road and this path. And Star Wars has always had this level of ambiguity to it, and the sequel trilogy is no different, right? And we're introduced to new things in every single film. Oddly, when all is said and done, the prequels, to me, are the most coherent from beginning to end in terms of storytelling. I think people will largely agree that the biggest problem they have with those is the directing and the acting. But the storyline through those three films, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, it's very cohesive. It really is only when you get into the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy being done by different creators that you end up with a little bit of inconsistency. And there's just as much inconsistency and ambiguity in the original trilogy as there is in the sequel trilogy. And I'm okay with both of those, because it allows for further exploration and conversation. A lot of The Last Jedi seems ruined now. That's not me. I don't see it ruined at all. I enjoyed watching The Last Jedi again, thinking in my mind, okay, Palpatine is in charge of this bad dude here. Kylo Ren's not aware of it. And Kylo Ren's explanation to why Rey was told that her parents were nobody, they chose to be. Kylo Ren didn't have all the information either. Look, it's all very thin. I'm not going to say that this is solid and that it is easy to go and connect these dots. It does require a little jumps in logic, right? A little light speed jumping in logic. But it's not light speed jumping in logic that's so thin that it doesn't make any sense whatsoever and strips away my personal enjoyment of it. All right, Misconduct 1, friend of the show, says this: I loved parts of the movie. I think they were trying so hard to please everyone that it sort of blew up in their faces. General audiences may love it as an action-packed popcorn movie. People like me strive to save all the things I love about it in my heart and look at the rest as sort of Star Wars camp, especially the pickled Snokes in a jar at the beginning of the movie. That makes me feel like Star Wars is a gift that just keeps giving. I love to have fun with stupid stuff like that. It is what it is, and I loved it. Not all of it, but a lot of it. I wish the movie would have been longer because the pacing really hurts my brain with this movie. I feel like I don't have time to feel anything about some of what's happening in it. I'm not salty, as some are feeling about the movie, and I think all their feelings are valid because of my past feelings about the prequels. I totally get it. My understanding in that way helps me not to become what I hate the most, which is a fandom menace type of person. Also, my feelings about how Game of Thrones ended. That's a whole different comment section, LOL, but I hope everyone can find good things this movie has to offer, and that time will heal all wounds for what they didn't like. Thanks for being so positive, and may the force be with you. Thank you, Misconduct One. I appreciate the comment as always, and I tend to echo those sentiments as well. And again, just goes back to my relabeling of the show Positively Star Wars and how I want to keep my personal commentary about these films. When it comes to the decision making in the movie, I'm really personally tired of this term fan service because I feel like it's just an easy thing to throw out there to try to attach some legitimacy to an individual's claim of criticism. Well, that's just fan service, but all these movies are fan service. They just are. Unless you go back to the creator being George Lucas. Really, anybody else making a Star Wars movie is making a fan movie. And so we're making things in these films that fans are supposed to enjoy. They're servicing the audience, so it's fans. So it's all fan service. I get the distinction. I just don't agree with that distinction. If it's Star Wars, it's Star Wars. And if the fans like it, the fans like it. If you want to call that fan service, you can call that fan service. As when it comes to the decision making and the reason to go with certain things over other things, I still firmly believe, as somebody that creates content, whether it's commentary about news and politics or writing my own science fiction stories, I still believe that the creators and the writers are doing what they believe is best and what they think they would enjoy, what they enjoy the most. I'm sure that there's some thought process going into how the fans are going to react to certain things, but I have a hard time believing, just based off of my own knowledge of the entertainment industry and the way this stuff is created, that there was any sort of larger discussions of, well, how do we go and make the fans happy with this? Let's do a little bit of both. Let's have Ben Solo get redeemed and their kiss, but we'll also have him die, and that'll make everybody happy. I don't think that's how that conversation went down. I think the conversation goes down, what's gonna work best? What's gonna be the most emotional impact with this, and what makes the most sense? And to me, Ben Solo passing away made the most sense. All right, let's get to more of your comments. Naisha writes this movie that is supposed to end 3 trilogies. It has to be satisfying, enjoyable, entertaining, and leave audiences feeling good. But it didn't. Many felt conflicted and confused because the movie was too convoluted, as if it's second-guessing itself. Okay. Let me switch this up a little bit. It has to be satisfying, enjoyable, entertaining, and leave audiences feeling good, but it didn't. It didn't for everybody. It didn't for you. It did for a lot of other people. And the box office totals are really good for this movie. And so for a lot of people, including myself, it was totally satisfying. I did leave feeling very much like I enjoyed it on all 6 of my viewings and today. And it was entertaining for me. So I get it that you didn't like it and that you felt it was too convoluted and second-guessing itself. But I just want to, again, reiterate that is you. That's not everybody. And this is the world that we live in right now. We had a guest on the show today for our Friday Roundtable. His name is Nick, great guy. And he asked me about Star Wars, because everybody always does. And my response to the fandom and the conversation and the controversy around the movie. And I was like, look, man, this is the world that we live in now. It's going to be this way for every major release. I think it'll be better when we are dealing with new characters and new stories. I think that's the case with The Mandalorian. Might be the reason why they went with The Mandalorian and not Boba Fett, because you can't carry in your preconceived ideas about that particular character if you're introducing a brand new character, even if he looks just like an old character and has a buddy that looks just like the old droid. We'll just call him IG-11 instead of IG-88. So maybe with whatever these next films are, If they're not, because I do think that if we're going back to Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic, that we could be in a similar situation. But if we have brand new saga films based off of brand new characters in new places, Rian Johnson's for instance, and these aren't individuals or anything that people can lay on top of their own preconceived ideas and notions, that we won't be dealing with these types of controversies. But this is the world that we live in right now. Twitter is a horrible place for discord and discussion. And it creates a completely false impression over how people actually feel about a particular thing based off of how the people that they follow, what they're into themselves, the number of individuals that are actually tweeting about a particular thing, everything that I mentioned at the top of the show. All right. Jen G says this: after some time, my viewing of The Rise of Skywalker, more thoughts. JJ is right that you can't please everyone. I also think he tried to please a bunch, and maybe some stuff got lost because of that, and having to pack so much stuff in a specific amount of time. I think on one podcast you suggested splitting this movie into 2 movies, and yes, I think that it could have been the cause or the case. I'm sure a bunch got cut, but watching it, it felt like a JJ movie to me, and I liked it. I do think JJ and Ryan's take were different to me, for sure, but I liked both. I found The Last Jedi more in-depth emotionally for me, but I liked the pace and the jokes in The Rise of Skywalker better. I cried in The Rise of Skywalker because of Ben, him and Han and Reylo and his death. Kylo/Ben is my all-time favorite Star Wars character, and that's saying something. Well, Adam is a huge reason. I did think that Kathleen Kennedy said no plans for another trilogy anytime soon, but if they do, I think they need to be the same director for all 3. I loved this movie, save Tatooine. I'm wondering, would you have thought it was great if he had lived? But on Twitter, I'm not there for the constant negativity, so I found a post through you where Star Wars lovers were asked to reply. I have since made a Star Wars lovers list and get my fix without the negativity. Good. That's good on you, man. It's been great. They do exist. Of course, you are on that list. Thank you very much. After all this, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm tired. I've been avoiding a lot of it to make sure that, this is supposed to be a fun time having a Star Wars movie in the theater, and it's just a bummer to see that there's controversy surrounding this like there was The Last Jedi, and so I try to just stay away from it because, that's not fun, and thank you for the comment. Let's see, Olga writes this: I've seen it 4 times and captivated by it. The acting of Driver and Ridley especially is so phenomenal. So into their roles, and I think that's one of the main reasons that Reylos wanted to see a more happy ending for Ben and Rey. When they interact on screen, the movie goes to a higher level. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I will say this, it's a bummer for me to see Reylos upset because, and again, just my opinion, we got way more Ben and Rey in this movie, and that moment with that kiss is one of my favorite moments. It's my favorite moment in all of the sequel trilogy for certain, but might be one of my favorite moments in all of the movies. I just thought that was magical. Tragic, but, good stories are often tragic and don't often play out the way that we are because, that's just good storytelling, right? And I know that's not for everybody. I'm just saying that's for me. So, all right, Colleen writes this: love the title change idea. Thank you. Always glad to hear your take on Star Wars. I'm going out to see it a second time with my family this coming week, and I can't wait. All right, let's see here. Let's go to a friend of the show, Scotian. First apologizes for the lengthy email. That's fine. Always like to listen to your podcast. Thank you. Love your take. Love that you love the movie. I will not attack someone for liking the movie. I like parts of the movie. I really love the Reylo bits. I see the movie twice now in theaters as opposed to 5 times that I saw The Last Jedi. I had to leave the theater the second time right after Ben died because I couldn't handle watching the ending again. My nephew and I both told my sister that we couldn't handle seeing it again. It's not just Ben dying that the Reylos are upset about. It's also how they handled Rey. As a woman and as a fan, I am depressed over how she was handled. They took a character that grew to be a strong character on her own who was a nobody and made her powers come from a man. Rey Palpatine was the biggest, most ridiculous thing to come out of this movie. My aunt and sister are both GA and both thought it was horrible. Then to top it off, at the end of the film, she ends up alone how she started. And in the visual dictionary, it confirms she is further isolating herself from the resistance, her so-called family. Here is a quote explaining how we are feeling. I feel like one of the most ironically sexist things that happened to women heroes for so long was that they had universal storytelling taken away from them. So male superheroes could have Lois Lane, they could have love, they could have vulnerability, but they could have complexity. But women superheroes or strong women characters had to be, I don't need anyone, I'm the toughest person in the world. That's not fair to anyone, to anybody. No human being is an island like that. That was Patty Jenkins on including Steve Trevor in a Wonder Woman film. Rey ended up like all female characters do nowadays, alone but a strong, independent woman. You know what? A woman can be strong and independent while still having a man. Let me stop here real quick. I don't disagree with that at all. But herein lies, again, sort of the problem with this particular... Oh, I want to word this correctly. You go the other way, and I'm going to get an email from somebody else saying the complete opposite with their own valid reasons. Right? It's not an absolute. If you have Rey not have the background of Palpatine, and I personally would argue that her strength didn't necessarily come from Palpatine. People want to use that as a means to explain why she was strong in the Force. That's people doing that, not the movie, in my opinion. I still think that Rey is strong in the Force because of Rey. A person can still choose to focus on the Force and to take advantage of it. I never needed her to have any strong lineage or background to explain her Force powers, but I also am totally fine if she is a descendant from somebody else. And in the larger storytelling, it makes sense when it comes to the story that they crafted. The dyad, how it came about, her coming from Palpatine, Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, coming from a Skywalker, creates the dyad. That makes all the sense in the world to me, right? And had you had her be potentially a nobody and ended up with Ben Solo at the end with him living, I guarantee you I would have gotten a complaint from people going, why did she have to have a man? Why couldn't she have just been by herself? That's probably about as negative of it as I'm going to get. So, look, your opinions are valid. All of your opinions are. I'm just saying that, again, it comes down to you cannot please everybody with these films. And if you go looking for the criticism, you're going to be able to find it. If I wanted to tear this movie apart, I could rip The Rise of Skywalker to shreds. Just like I could rip The Force Awakens to shreds. Just like I could rip The Last Jedi to shreds. You could rip most of these movies to shreds. I just particularly choose not to. All right, getting back to this. This ties into the fact that Ben dying did not have to happen. I disagree with you when you said he had to die and a different story had to be told for him to live. If you break the story down, it actually makes more sense for him to live. Yeah, I get that Ben did horrible stuff and I'm tired of the redemption arcs ending in death. Completely tired. Okay, that's a personal choice, by the way. I'm just saying. That's a personal choice of you being tired with that particular trope. Okay, because other people aren't. Okay. Once you put all the extra media that's been published together and realize how manipulated and abused Ben was all his life, wow, just wow. He deserved to live and not die. Disney has reset a poll 4 times asking which character we want to see most. Guess who won each time? Kylo Ren, Ben Solo. Every time, 85 to 90% of people chose Ben. This here is telling. It's not, and I'll explain why in a moment. Also, the fact that none of the Jedi spoke to Ben, including his grandfather, wow, pretty sad. I was disheartened when you said the negative comedy around this movie is irrational. It's not. Should people be putting others down or attacking creators? No, but here's the thing. Most of us Reylos are not acting out. And look, that's not necessarily true either. I mean, not everybody is, but I've seen plenty of it. I'm just saying, right? A small part are, but you know what most of us did? Took our money and gave it to Adam Driver's charity. That's a pretty darn positive thing. Anyways, enough negativity from me. Glad you can keep it positive. All right, first off, when it comes to polls, I put no stock in polls. I just don't. What was the sample size? Who was polling on it? Where was it put out? All of those things come into play. Any random poll, even if Star Wars put out, carries no weight or bearing whatsoever on the general movie-going audience. to the ancillary materials not particularly matching up with The Rise of Skywalker. I've read the ancillary materials, and I disagree. So, again, it's a difference of opinion. And I'll reiterate, 99% of the audience who went to go see The Rise of Skywalker is not reading those ancillary materials. And those ancillary materials are being written by individuals who weren't directly involved with The Rise of Skywalker. And they were put through the story group and done very delicately to make sure they're not stepping on too many toes. But to ask for any sort of cohesion, it's just not going to happen. And it's very similar to the same complaints that the people had about The Last Jedi as well. And I pushed back on those too. It's a bummer. It's a bummer that you didn't like it and that you felt slighted and all that. And to each their own. I do disagree with regard to that. And again, I'll just reiterate, you disagreeing with the way the story had to be told. I still believe that's the way the story had to be told, right? Kylo Ren murdered a bunch of people. As a matter of fact, somebody had brought up, what was I listening to? It might have been Knights of Vader. But there was a whole, oh man, I wish I could, I don't remember it now. Somebody had made a point about sort of Kylo Ren's atrocities, and there was one particular one that I had, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I remember what it was now. The opening of The Force Awakens. He orders the First Order troopers to kill the entire village right after he murdered Lord Santekka in cold blood. Again, if they could have made Ben work and Ben and Rey gone off together, that would have been fine. I would have been totally down with that. It would have been great. I'm a hopeless romantic. But I'm 100% fine with the way that they handled it. All right, let's go to... Coffee Pie says this: I'm so happy to see a positive video, loving the movie as much as I did. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Coffee Pie. Ashley writes this: I enjoyed The Force Awakens, but I fell in love with Star Wars all over again with The Last Jedi. After my second viewing, The Rise of Skywalker has grown on me. I still don't like the ending. Maybe that will grow on me too. I honestly felt the ending on Tatooine needed Anakin and Ben Force Ghosts and maybe even Obi-Wan to really say that she wasn't alone. Maybe, but you know what would have happened if that, and again, I feel like I'm apologizing for this movie. I'm not necessarily trying to do that. I just love the film. But adding some clarity to this, had they included those Force Ghosts, or as people have suggested that there's a secret cut where all of the Force Ghosts end up there at the end to assist Rey, and you can see Anakin and Obi-Wan and even Ben's there or whatever. Look, if you had done that, people would have been complaining, why did Rey need help from other Jedis in order to defeat Palpatine? If you included more Force Ghosts at the end of the film, people would have cried more fan service. Again, can't make everybody happy. Brett says this: I've seen the movie 5 times so far and absolutely love it. My wife, like yours, surprised me by saying she would like to see it a 3rd time. I know my wife may go see it again with me. That'll be her 6th time. She usually likes to see a movie like 1 time, right? And that's my wife is exactly the same way. So we're right there together. Percy says this: my favorite part was Ben and Han's scene. Yeah, that's interesting too. Because the Han Solo showing up, there's ambiguity there as well. But I've kind of landed on Leia having a big hand in that. That was Leia's final act before she enabled Kylo Ren or Ben Solo to transform into the Force when he died at the end. I feel like where my head goes right now, and I'm curious to see what the book says, is that memory of Han Solo was actually being brought about because of the Force connection that Leia had made in sacrificing herself so that her son could be redeemed. All right, Ardere says this: on my first viewing of the movie, I was confused and numb. In the second viewing, I enjoyed it more, probably because I knew the plot, so the pacing wasn't confusing. I still don't like several plot or character choices. Even after the second viewing, I'm moving on to The Mandalorian and Clone Wars and Rebels. I just finished Mara's story and Knives Out. Thank you. I am Jarrett Dean says this: your wife sounds awesome. Good for you. Thanks, man. Yeah, she is pretty cool. Dale writes this: Ben became what his grandfather couldn't, unconditional. Anakin turned back to the light, recognizing his love for the family through unconditional love for him, seeing the light in him. Many people feel this trilogy undid what Anakin did do. Ironically, he did, in fact, end the Sith reign. I'm glad more people see what I see. Thank you for the comment. Christina writes this. I am a Reylo, and I absolutely loved The Rise of Skywalker. It made me love the sequels, actually. The franchise even more. That they were able to tell such a poignant, moving love story. I told a friend yesterday that Romeo and Juliet ends in a much sillier, more unsatisfactory way, and nobody complains. I will definitely go back to other Reylo channels once they're done with the anger stage of their grieving process, because it all comes from investing too much in the characters, which I can completely relate to, and I do feel for them. Finally, praise be to the spoilers, which prepared me for Ben's death at a moment when I wasn't so hyped as I am now. Thanks for being a steady refuge for the positively bewildered. Thank you, Christina. Jesse just writes, I love Star Wars. I do too. All right. J.O.B. says this. I wanted for Reylo and Ben Demption to happen, and I am not disappointed. Ben was redeemed by Rey, and in turn sacrificed himself to save her, doing what Anakin didn't do with Padme. He truly found happiness and spent the rest of his life with the woman that he loved. I say it tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. He had a few minutes more than others will have in a lifetime. As far as Rey taking the Skywalker name, she has every right to it. Is my wife, who takes my last name, not entitled to it? Or the children we adopt any less part of my family? She was far more Skywalker than Palpatine. I love how Luke and Leia were handled in the series. They were given a lot of depth. Another thing I like is that Luke was the equivalent to Obi-Wan and Leia was the equivalent to Yoda in Rey's training. Leia was Rey's master. How amazing is it to honor Carrie Fisher's legacy? I believe Disney's handling of Star Wars is far superior to anything that's come out in Legends material. Totally agree. My opinion, if George Lucas approves of the movies or not, I say his opinion doesn't matter. He sold his right to have any say in the story. I appreciate the love and impact he has and his movies have had on my life, but Star Wars is bigger than any one man. I believe the series is far better off in the hands it's in, and love the story and the characters in the sequels and Mandalorian. I'm sick of the hate the sequels have gotten. Fans complained that TFA was too safe. They wanted their expectations subverted. TLJ subverted expectations and was received with vicious hatred from fans saying it wasn't Star Wars or it ruined it. The Rise of Skywalker had many confirmed fan theories, and fans complained that there was too much fan service. Ridiculous. And I agree, and let me add to that again. It is not, in my opinion, the majority. It is a vocal minority that uses a platform to put out what they want to put out with their opinion. That can have a positive impact and it can have a negative impact. And speaking of negative impact, the box office has been really good for The Rise of Skywalker, all things considered, when it comes to this franchise. It's going to do just fine and make a ton of money. It's going to make another $1 billion just like The Last Jedi did. It was only slow, in my opinion, opening weekend because the critics were largely split on it. Completely opposite of what happened with The Last Jedi, where the critics loved it and then the fans were split when they went and saw it. At least if you pay attention to Rotten Tomatoes. All right. Best Meister says this. Show's failure to acquire new generation of fans while disenchanting off large number of old fans, nerds included, shouldn't be defended. Even clear vision and planning ahead by the original creator could result in failure. Prequels. Disagree, but that's okay. So no wonder current Disney trilogy is a mess. If Star Wars film, instead of joining fans, divides them, it is a garbage. Disney should stick to make Mandalorian-style own stories from get-go, and if they wanted their heroes to be separated and not share fame and money. I don't understand why you even go to such troubles of defending this if you're not a shill or heavily biased. Wow, that's a ridiculous hot take. Look, the movies should bring people together, and if they don't, then a trilogy is a mess. Again, I referred to everything that I said before. Perception doesn't equal reality. It just doesn't. And this is the world that we live in right now. And to me, no offense, Best Meister, but you're wrong in this regard. If a Star Wars film, instead of joining fans, divide them, it's garbage. No, that's just perception. It's just perception. If this movie had come out without Twitter, we would not even be having this discussion. End of story. Those conversations, you would see the box office totals, and they perhaps would be higher because you wouldn't have so many voices perhaps keeping a handful of people from going to the theater. But if you didn't have Twitter with The Rise of Skywalker coming out, you would see the box office numbers, you would go, that movie was a success, and you'd be done with it. If you didn't like it, you'd be having conversations with your friends, and that would be the end of it. Not the world we live in anymore. The world we live in now is proof that we never, ever should have a machine that could read people's minds. Because all you have to do is look at Twitter. Because Twitter is the perfect example and pushback against a mind-reading machine. Because too many people use Twitter and don't think about what it is that they are going to say and just put it out there. When the reality is, probably should have thought about that before you put it out there again. All right. Whew. I knew this was going to be rough. I know that I'm calling it Positively Star Wars. So if this is coming off as too much negativity, I will apologize up front on the first newly labeled show, Positively Star Wars. However, I knew going into it, maybe I should have prefaced it, that I had quite a few testy emails in here that I was going to be responding to in kind. So I'm sorry. That, to me, comes off as like all the stuff that I read beforehand was pretty rational. Scotian was really rational. That was an irrational take. All right, moving forward. On Fasuvi, friend of the show. Thanks, John. I love the new Positively Star Wars name on your show that it will feature. I also think that time may prove Rey did end up staying at the Lars Moisture Farm. Yeah, maybe. Perhaps starting a training school there, since the music playing during that scene is titled A New Home on the soundtrack. But we might have to wait many years to learn about that with certainty. Yeah, so I had heard that the title for that closing track of Rey being on Tatooine of A New Home wasn't necessarily indicative of John Williams or confirmation that she was going to stay there. That could be referring to the lightsabers in and of themselves. My understanding is that John Williams actually scores these films without listening to them. So he may not even have been fully aware and doesn't read the script beforehand of what the totality of that scene was, and calling it A New Home just made sense, and it could have been simply about putting the lightsabers there. She could potentially stay there on Fasuvi. That is possible. I know there's some references to that perhaps being the case. I'm still kind of under the impression that she ends up going someplace else as I knock down all my stuff here. All right. Friend of mine and show, Tony, writes this. About The Rise of Skywalker, I want to say that I absolutely loved it, even more on our second viewing. I think my wife likes The Last Jedi a bit more, but I like The Rise of Skywalker the best out of the sequel trilogy. Really looking forward to seeing it again. The only things I didn't like were things that were not there. I wish the producers had used title cards every time they showed a different planet. Yeah, it's one of those things, too, where I wouldn't have necessarily minded that too much, but it also would have pushed against the saga films up until now, so that would have sort of been breaking tradition, but we started breaking tradition when we started with flashbacks. So, let's see. It wasn't even close to obvious during the first watch, and only upon listening to your podcasts, Knights of Vader and RFR, did I find out where they were. I also think the movie should have included more dialogue and scenes to better explain certain things and possibly split it into two parts like Deathly Hallows. However, those are pretty minor complaints, and overall I'm happy with the way it turned out. One thing that was mentioned by an RFR listener is the overarching theme of all the Star Wars movies is sacrifice. I was reflecting on this today during my walk, and it's very true. Every single film, all 11 of them, have an element of at least one character sacrificing themselves for the good of another. Today we watched Mandalorian Chapter 7 for the third time and 8 for the second time. I really love this series more than anything else on TV right now. I watched each chapter 2 or 3 times, and I hardly ever do that with TV. Today I had the realization that the show is basically the Lone Ranger in space, which I used to watch growing up. That may be a reason why I love it so much. The other being that it is a direct extension of the original trilogy with SO callbacks. So far, I can't find a single thing wrong with the series, and I look forward to season 2. One thing, may I ask for more coverage on your podcast of The Mandalorian and other series coming out? Maybe have a separate podcast so people won't get spoiled. Just a thought. Knights of Vader and RFR do this. I listen to their reviews and reactions as well. Thanks again. May the Force be with you, Tony. P.S. I still haven't read or listened to Treasure in Darkness. What are you doing, Tony? It's okay. Mainly due to keeping up with so many podcasts. I'll definitely let you know when I do. Thank you, Tony. As always, I appreciate it. All right, let's go to Miranda. Great podcast once again. Nice to see that we had a special guest this time around. Love the idea of you changing the title of your show, even though you're already a positive person to begin with. Oh, thanks. Even after all the ranting I just did, Miranda, I'll be interested to hear what your comments are. I have to say I'm already getting tired of the discourse already, mainly on Twitter and YouTube. I'm at the point right now where I just don't want to bother anymore, because if I get myself upset at the people for the same things, it's just contributing to more negativity that doesn't have to be there. Maybe we stop giving negative people attention to their tweets, retweet, or anything like that. I don't know it wouldn't be this hostile. However, upon my first screening, in my head, I decided that it's better to let others in the fandom pick their battles. All I can do is set a better example for myself, right? I wasn't always an angel either. Look at the way I've ranted in the comment sections. I sound like I belong on the dark side of YouTube. I even got rid of some of those rants I made because that's not how I want to represent myself. I don't want to be someone who rants all the time. It's boring. And with all this discourse, we're not getting anything new. It's different this time because of, well, you know why, but either way, it's getting boring and old. Let's calm down, pretty please. I hope this is not a rant. No, it was great. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. All right. N Black writes this. I agree with your positive outlook. Although this new trilogy is not on the level of the originals, it still has a lot going for it. They are all visually stunning and some great Star Wars moments, solid acting, a great soundtrack and sound design. The Last Jedi is the crown jewel of the three. Rogue One is the best movie under the Disney regime, in my opinion. You know, it's so funny because I hear so many people say that, and it's cool. I really thought that Rogue One was going to end up being one of my favorite of the new movies, and it's oddly one of the ones that I return to the least. I don't think that's because of the quality of the film. I think it's because if I'm going to sit down and randomly watch Star Wars, I'm going to pick one of the saga films. And I still am kind of tossed between which one I love more, Solo or Rogue One. Well, again, I love them both for different reasons and different levels at different times of the day. Andrea F. writes this. Let me start out by echoing the sentiments of a lot of the listeners, apparently. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the film, but I did not. I listened to your podcast before my husband and I went to see the movie because I love your positivity, and I knew it would amp me up and get me excited for the movie. I went into the movie wanting to desperately love it. I had listened to spoilers. I knew what to expect. I knew Kylo would be redeemed and turned back into Ben Solo and that he would also die. I didn't like the idea of Ben Solo dying, but I'd hoped against hope that it would play out on screen the way that I could make peace with it. It didn't. I also didn't understand Rey's reaction, or basically lack thereof, to his passing. She showed more emotion with when Han Solo, someone she'd known for a couple of days, died than she did when this man that she loved and that had sacrificed his life for hers died. I guess I would argue that she just came back from the dead herself, so she was kind of in a different emotional state than she was at the end of The Force Awakens, but be that as it may. Let's see. She admitted that she wanted to take Ben's hand, and she doesn't care that he died in the act of sacrificial love for her. I don't understand. Bummer. I also don't think Ben had to die. If we're going to say it's because, well, maybe he didn't order the destruction of those planets, but he did nothing to stop it, then what about Poe and Leia in The Last Jedi? What about the beginning of The Last Jedi when Leia tells Poe to retreat and he ignores her, and it results in the death of all those innocent lives? I'd say he is responsible for those lives as well. I'd also say that she is responsible because even though he turned off the communication with her, he could still have contacted her and other pilots and ordered them to retreat. So she did nothing as well and therefore responsible too. And what is Poe's punishment? A slap in the face and a demotion? I say that's a little bit of a double standard. Please forgive my rambling. I hope you don't take this as an angry rant or attack because I certainly didn't mean it that way. Just trying to make sense of the movie and the choices that were made, and I can't. I would have been so much more beautiful if after Ben sacrificing his life to save Rey, that Leia would have sacrificed her life to save her son. These are just my thoughts and opinion. Please don't take this as an angry rant. I love your show, and we'll continue to listen. I'm hopeful with time I will be able to find some beauty and enjoyment in the movie. And I don't Andrea, and I appreciate you commenting. Let me just let me address it. Let me address it this way. To all your other points, again, if we begin to go down the road of completely nitpicking the movie and trying to set up equivalencies in things, we're just going to be in a confused, muddled mess. I guess what I'm saying is, if it didn't work for you, it didn't work for you, right? It didn't work for you for the reasons that you laid out, and it completely worked for me for the reasons that I laid out. And we'll agree to disagree and move on. To Alejandra. Hope I said that right. Alejandra. I'm happy that this new movie met your expectation for the end of the sequel trilogy, as I am happy that your lady wants to consume more Star Wars. I found myself wishing to feel that way in the theater, but sadly I didn't. I usually agree with pretty much everything you say, but this time I can't. Back when The Last Jedi came out, Reylos were the first to defend it. I was in that troop, but it was because that movie had sense. I was the first to point out The Last Jedi's weak points as well, but that movie had a lot more to offer. This one doesn't. I always have the highest respect for your opinion since you've been a fan for so long, but you cannot deny that this film does not wrap up 3 films, much less 9. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, personally. Because I do believe that it wrapped up 9 films. And I liked the way that it wrapped up 9 films. And we just disagree with that. I thought it did it great. I actually think the ending to The Rise of Skywalker does a better job of wrapping up the 9 movies than Return of the Jedi did in wrapping up those 6 movies. And with that, I'm going to move on to the next comment. Thank you for writing in. All right. Luna Jur says this. Okay, it's taking me a couple days to listen to the full video because life. Yeah, and the last episode was 2 hours long. But I just listened to the end, and when your wife was talking about Rey looking to his eyes and seeing him again and calling him Ben, it actually put tears in my eyes. It's so nice to hear someone else who gets it. Yeah, my wife is it's pretty darn awesome. All right, to Agnes, friend of the show, writes this. I saw The Rise of Skywalker yesterday, and I guess I'm no Star Wars fan. I found it hard to enjoy, too fast-paced even for JJ standards. Not enough time with the characters. What really bugged me were 3 things. Creepy Palpatine, and horror-like... well, we'll go with creepy. I'm not sure what she's trying to say here. My 8-year-old got nightmares 2 nights straight, and I cannot bring my 6-year-old to see this movie for any foreseeable future. Okay. All in all, my son and his friends were left lukewarm, tried to forget the film, went off to play Clone Wars. I'm not sure about the future of the franchise. Okay, that's anecdotal at best. I'm not particularly worried about it. The laziness of killing off Ben Solo. It would have been okay if that was executed better. But we got 5 minutes of him and bang, off he went. Felt rushed after 3 movies, 4 novels, and comics build-up. I hope the film will get a longer cut release soon. I cannot stand watching it again in its present form. Who knows? Maybe we'll get the alternative ending in those cut scenes. I envy your optimism. By the way, have you seen the obscene tweets from John Boyega? This guy has totally lost my respect. No wonder Rose is not his girlfriend anymore in the movie. I'm sure Miss Tran did not want to be near him ever again. Yeah, for those that didn't see it, John Boyega made some stupid comment about it doesn't matter who you're kissing, it matters who's laying pipe or something like this. It was really stupid and completely inappropriate. I'll be honest with you, outside the Star Wars movies, and I kind of feel the same way about Mark Hamill, to be honest with you, and I'm always honest with you, John Boyega just, there's certain actors that you just kind of gravitate towards and they seem like cool people. Adam Driver seems like a really cool person. Daisy Ridley, who I actually for a while didn't think she was, during this last press circuit, I actually kind of adhered myself more to her. Oscar Isaac seems like a really cool dude. John Boyega comes off very arrogant to me. And the comment that he made about how they're not going to Disney Plus me, I just felt was weird. So I wasn't surprised to see him make that comment. It'll be interesting to see if he ends up getting any pushback because of it, because it was really inappropriate. But moving on. Christina writes this. I agree with you about the screen grab spoilers that were posted prior to the 19th. I actually almost didn't go on Thursday, but I'm glad that I still did go. I have seen it twice and truly love it. Part of me still wanted more from Ben. His sacrifice was so beautiful, and I'm sure more people will be more will be revealed as I view it again. Thanks for the positive message, because Twitter and Tumblr are absolutely not positive lately. I know. Matayahu Matiti Yahoo. My apologies. And I probably still got that wrong, but I hope I nailed it. Rey is a Palpatine, but she had the heart of a Skywalker. Totally agree. All right, we got 2 left here. Let's start off with Tiffany, and then we're going to end on friend of the show, Tiffany, and then we're going to end on friend of the show, Severin. All right. My thoughts on The Rise of Skywalker. Gut reaction after first viewing was incredible sadness when I left the theater, which I equate to good writing. If I hadn't loved the character of Ben Solo Kylo Ren so much, if Adam Driver weren't so fantastic in his portrayal, I wouldn't have felt this overwhelming sadness at his death. I imagine that is why there is weird, harsh reaction from a portion of the fandom. Just knee-jerk reactions to high emotions. I'm trying to get on board in viewing these as historical documents, and that has helped, but overall I wish they had gone a different route, redeeming the character without resulting in his death. On subsequent viewings, I found myself liking it more and more. I actually love the fast pacing. I love Babu Frick. C-3PO had some great lines. I absolutely loved Ben Solo's moment with his dad. It was so beautiful. Loved the new characters. Didn't mind Rose having less time. There was too much to do to give a ton of screen time to her. I loved the kiss and agree that it didn't, and the way that they made Reylo complete. And the hope on Rey's face in the ending scene. The score was outstanding. I also agreed that I didn't think she was staying there. In my mind, she would be going back to train Finn or other Force-sensitive users. I would have loved to see all the Jedi Force Ghosts behind Rey in the moment when Rey says, "I am all the Jedi." It would have been so cool. Palpatine had his weird Sith ghost pose in the audience. Why can't Rey? That's what's in my head canon. Also, something really cool I realized, Rey and Palpatine's themes mirror each other. If you take out the embellishments in Rey's, it's basically Palpatine's theme. John Williams, you legend. Most of my family is like your wife. Not diehard fans, but nonetheless, they all loved it. I went with my entire family on the third viewing with all of my nieces and nephews. I have 14, and in the end, there was such a warm feeling in the group that it reminded me that this is what Star Wars is for. At the end of the day, Star Wars for me is about bringing people together to entertain and to go on an adventure, teach lessons of good and evil, and show the triumph of good. I'm so disappointed that there are people leaving the show because of their opinions that are different from your own. Yeah, it happens. Thank you, though, Tiffany. I love the discourse. I love that you don't make anyone feel their opinion is inferior or wrong. And listen, if I did that earlier, I apologize, but I have my own sort of set of standards that I use, and when people say you're wrong, then I feel like I'd like to reply, well, no, I'm not, because I'm allowed to feel this way. So anyway. You just state yours and the reasons why, and still read those that have a different of opinion. While I don't agree with everything you've gleaned from this film, I'm still here and I'm excited for more dialogue and analysis. Thank you very much, Tiffany. All right, and we'll wrap up with Severin. Dear John, up until shortly before the release of The Rise of Skywalker, I was quite proud to consider myself a Reylo. Now, to paraphrase what a few other individuals in the schisming Reylo community have written into your show to express, it seems as though a majority of that once fuzzy, loving conglomeration has become the very thing it was fighting to overcome, even as little as a month ago. Gee, that sounds familiar. Anakin's turned to the dark side. I find it somewhat bewildering. The first time I walked out of The Rise of Skywalker, the only thing I felt was pure euphoria, right? Blissful, beautiful, validating, victorious Reylo euphoria. And that was even after having been slightly spoiled by the ending before seeing the film from individuals not having all of the facts straight and perpetuating a pretty inaccurate dark version of the story. So going into the film, I was expecting to ignore any and all the Reylo past and have Kylo Ren die a horrible, unredeemed death or something, based on the initial reactions of the first raging Reylos who were spreading spoilers online. I was downright dumbfounded when what played out was as incredibly Reylo-tastic and Ben-demption-y as I ever could have hoped for and more. Did I see the same film as everyone else? What happened to all their talk about respectfully and quietly disagreeing with the writers, directors, and Disney's vision for Star Wars? Even after the cold reception I found online before and after my first viewing, the next time I saw The Rise of Skywalker, I walked out feeling the same sense of peace and bliss. I'm still a Reylo. Totally ship Ben Solo and Rey and immensely enjoy all the crazy places my overactive headcanon takes me when I think about them interacting together. So, I'm taking a cleansing break from the raging Reylos online, simply so that I can experience my own post-The Rise of Skywalker Reylo shipping in peace. If there's one thing I find disappointing, surrounding the Rise of Skywalker. It's that the once happy and welcoming Star Wars fan community I was a part of has comedically stabbed themselves in the back, so to speak. I guess the inner Sith will always find a way to emerge, even in chosen ones. But that's not going to harsh my mellow. Hashtag I'm still a Reylo. Hashtag I love Star Wars. Sincerely, Severin. I'm super excited, P.S. I'm super excited for Positively Star Wars. Happy New Year. Thank you, Severin, very much, and I really appreciate your comments and all of your comments, even the ones that are negative. And I'll just say up front, I apologize if, for whatever reason, I came off as too negative or harsh in some of my commentary about the film when going through some of that listener feedback. I was responding appropriately, and you can always expect positivity from this. But again, like I said, if people are going to challenge me on my opinion and say my opinion is wrong, then I'm probably going to respond in kind. All right, and that wraps it up for this week. And hey, I got it in just over an hour too. Yay! Thanks for checking the show out. Welcome to 2020. Happy New Year to you. I hope you enjoy Positively Star Wars. We'll be back next week. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't already. Make sure that you subscribe to wherever you listen to this, whether it is on YouTube or on Podbean or iTunes or Stitcher or Spreaker or wherever. And as always, you can support the show by picking up a copy of EMBARK, or EMBARK Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, ebook, paperback, and audiobook, all available on Amazon.com. Coming up in just a moment will be a little bit more about that if you haven't purchased the book yet. And if you have and you enjoyed them, please go and leave a positive comment. All right, so with that, I'll tell you to, or I'll say, have a fantastic week. I'm going to go see The Rise of Skywalker again, and I'll be back again next week with another full show. May the Force be with you, and now here's Obi-Wan Kenobi to essentially go and tell you exactly the same thing I just did.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.